Welcome back. Tensions are running high in Ukraine after mass gunmen overran the parliament building in Crimea region. This follows clashes between pro- and anti-Russian demonstrators, which left several people injured, while opposition politicians have moved swiftly to fill the vacuum left by the departures of President Viktor Yanukovych, whose whereabouts are still unknown. Asari Yansoni has been appointed Prime Minister, but as we hear in this report, he faces many problems, not least the threat to separatism in the largely Russian-speaking Crimea.
Flag flew over the regional parliament in Simferopol, Crimea. Last night, a group of armed men seized the building in this autonomous region of Ukraine, where many ethnic Russians are eager to rejoin the Russian Federation.
When they took over the parliament, they ordered the police out. Then some buses showed up with about 30 people on them. They brought bags which contained anti-tank weapons, sniper rifles, Kalashnikovs and handguns. These people are fully armed. There are Russian paratroopers, or whatever they call themselves.
This sign outside Parliament reads, "Crimea is Russian." The peninsula, with its largely Russian population, became part of Ukraine in 1954. Since then, Sevastopol on the Black Sea has served as a base for the Russian Navy. Crimea is likely to resist closer ties with Europe, now that President Yanukovych has fallen from power. On Wednesday, there were outbreaks of fighting between pro-European and pro-Russian groups. The latter are calling for a referendum on whether to secede from Ukraine. However, the country's designated prime minister said there was no question of Crimea's secession.
The new government will do everything and use all legal means to stabilize the situation in Crimea and to convince the entire world and all Ukrainian neighbors that Ukraine is a sovereign, united country and no separatism is allowed.
The crisis in Ukraine is being followed closely both by the West and by Russia, which on Wednesday placed its military on alert, especially troops stationed along the Ukrainian border.
Nobody should make mistakes at this point, and the United States is committed to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity at this critical time.
NATO is also concerned. NATO's Secretary General on Thursday urged Russia not to take any action that could provoke a further escalation of tensions.
News coming in now. The general public is hereby informed that His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Sheikh Professor Alhaji Dr. Yahya Ejiji Jammeh, is expected home today, Friday 28th February at 3 p.m. Those invited to see him should be at the airport half an hour before the time of his usual ceremonies. The Kenyan President, Uhuru Kenyatta, has a promise to send 300 extra troops to South Sudan to bolster the overstretched United Nations peacekeeping force in South Sudan. President Kenyatta was speaking in Juba following talks with President Salva Kiir on how to end the crisis that gripped the country last year. We have more on this report.
UN peacekeepers as they entered Malalkal on Wednesday. The capital of the Nile state in South Sudan was deserted following a recent attack. Peacekeepers said they found hundreds of bodies lying along the roads. Buildings had been looted and burned. Peacekeepers found patients at the local hospital who had been shot or knifed to death in their beds. The hospital equipment was looted or vandalized. The UN humanitarian coordinator was astounded by the slaughter.
I'm really very, very moved by what I saw in Malakal. I was here 4 weeks ago with Valerie Amos, and it was a city that was coming back to life. Well, that life has come to an end.
On Wednesday, UN peacekeepers evacuated 1,800 residents who had taken refuge in one of the last surviving churches. They were then taken to UN refugee camps where some 75,000 South Sudanese have sought protection since fighting broke out 2 months ago in a power struggle between President Salva Kiir and former Vice President Riek Machar. Fighting has been ongoing despite a ceasefire declared in January. On Tuesday, the Kenyan president, who was acting as mediator in negotiations, arrived in Juba.
You do not want to see.
All of these efforts, all geared towards ensuring quick, speedy resolution, peace, for the people of South Sudan and stability for the whole region.
President Kenyatta said that an additional 310 troops will be deployed as part of the UN mission. Since the conflict began in December, more than 1,000 people have been killed and nearly 900,000 driven from their homes.
A summit of the Common Market for East and Southern Africa has opened in the Congolese capital, Kinshasa. However, the presence of the Sudanese President Omar Hassan al-Bashir has angered some Western-funded human rights organizations, seeking his extradition to The Hague to face alleged war crime charges. The ICC has called on the Congolese government to arrest General Bashir, as he heard in this report. The Congolese government will likely ignore the request.
Is taking part in the gathering of the COMESA, the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, in Kinshasa. The International Criminal Court in The Hague has issued 2 arrest warrants for the President of Sudan for war crimes and crimes against humanity. But Kinshasa is sticking to the African Union party line.
We are obliged to follow a binding resolution for the non-execution by African Union member states of mandates against heads of states while they are in office.
Omar al-Bashir arrived in DR Congo on Tuesday. That night, 90 local associations called for his arrest. The NGOs criticized the position of the Congolese government and also the African Union.
What the AU is doing is based only on the actions of a small group of leaders who do not respect human rights in their own countries. They do not want to arrest him because they don't want to find themselves on the sides of the victims of the crimes in Darfur, like the victims of crimes committed on Congolese territory.
DR Congo has on several occasions handed over its own nationals to the international courts. Its refusal to do so for Omar al-Bashir is a step backwards, according to human rights associations.
This way of acting selectively can only darken the image of the country. It appears to be a two-speed justice system. We take an interest in the strongest people and protect them, and we crush the weakest.
On Thursday, the International Criminal Court officially asked the DR Congo to arrest the Sudanese president. However, the request will most likely go nowhere, as Kinshasa refuses to change its position.
We now take a second break. Hereby informed that His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Sheikh Professor Alhaji Dr. Yahya Jammeh, is expected home today, Friday 28th February at 3 p.m. Those invited to see him should be at the airport half an hour before time of the usual ceremonies. And before we take leave of you, a quick reminder of these stories. 200 young people armed with the requisite skills to power the informal sector are poised to contribute their quota to the attainment of national development targets. Residents of Sinchalaji recently embarked on a massive road rehabilitation exercise in the spirit of Tesitu. Kenya has pledged to strengthen the overwhelmed United Nations peacekeeping force in South Sudan with an additional 300 troops. And Ukraine's new leaders have unveiled a new cabinet against the backdrop of fear the largely Russian-speaking Crimea region could succeed from the rest of the country. That was all in this edition of news. Thanks for the pleasure of your company. Do stay with us. I am Sylvia Grace George. Good afternoon.